We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
My name is Lou Palumbo. This is Operation Truth. You can reach us at operationtruthofficial.gmail.com. That's operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. With us today, we have the pleasure once again of having Rick Robillard, a former FBI supervisor. He was the head of the Criminal Intelligence Division of the FBI, and Tom Fuentes, my co-host, who was an assistant director of the FBI, and I know that many of you have probably followed his career, which is very distinguished, just to put it to you politely. Both of these men, they had really distinguished careers. I want to push off on this discussion about the borders because of the way it's starting to impact our cities. New York, there's no secret. Eric Adams doesn't know which way to turn, and it's the situation that I suspect he once embraced, because about 15 months ago, he was standing at the Port Authority building on 42nd Street and 8th Avenue, shaking hands with migrants illegal in our country as they came off buses, telling everyone this is New York, we're a sanctuary city, everybody's welcome, we take care of everybody. Well, about 140,000 migrants further down the road, as we could put it, he's starting to realize, and in his words, it's going to destroy New York City. We have migrants that we brought here that we're doing a disservice to. We're failing to properly vet them, number one, which is a disservice to the country. We can't seem to assimilate them. And our best offerings at this point is you can sleep on cardboard, literally on the intersection of 45th Street, Madison Avenue, outside the Roosevelt Hotel. I'm trying to figure out what type of accommodation this really is. It's becoming a problem that is going to resonate well beyond what it's doing to New York City and Chicago and other cities throughout this country that are not prepared to take on this policy at the border. And I want to start out by asking a very simple question. Who is supposed to benefit from this border policy? Tom, I'm going to come to you first, and then Rick, be prepared. You're in the on-deck circle, sir. Tom?
Yeah, I think that, we're not benefiting is right, but this is a policy decision that the president has made going into his first day of office. This is Joe Biden's policy. Now, it's a continuation of policies that Obama would have liked to have had, and Obama is partially running the country behind the scenes, behind Joe Biden, in my opinion. But Biden is basically decided that those boundaries don't need to be enforced, and that's the entire southern boundary of the United States. Let it be wide open, and we don't care. He doesn't care. So this
Tom, can I stop you for a second, sir? If I may be so rude as to interrupt you. You mentioned the southern border. Tom, what about all the people that violate our immigration laws who are overstays of their visas, or the northern border? What about
That's a much less sensitive problem in a way, for two reasons. Number one, northern border, as you saw a week or so ago, the car that exploded in front of a checkpoint, the northern border has a much stronger boundary, not because the Americans want a strong border, the Canadians want it. They don't want us just pouring into their country or through their country. So that's why the Canadian border with the United States is a much different situation than the U.S.-Mexico border. So that's a big difference, basically, between the two borders. Now, the southern border, it's wide open. There's nothing. And the president, and we don't see our president hold a press conference where the different members of the media and say, Mr. President, what makes you think this is a good idea to have an open border? Mr. President, what makes you think that Americans support having 10 million people a day practically cross into the United States? Mr. President, this is hurting the country. No, you don't hear any of that because Biden doesn't put himself in a position to be asked questions that are hard questions. And for him, practically everything's a hard question. So to me, that's one of the biggest problems here, is that there's no effort to enforce the law at the southern border. You've mentioned on the podcast before that I think is treason. I agree with you. It's treasonous to not enforce the most important critical law protecting the United States, and that's the control of our own borders. They've just given that control away. As far as you mentioned overstays, the advantage for the country, let's say, in people that overstay their visa is they had to be vetted to get the visa in the first place. So if they come in, we know who they are, we know where they came from, we know what steps they took to get that visa. So if they're here and they're only supposed to stay 90 days or a year or whatever it might be, and they overstay, we at least know who they are. The people that are crossing the southern border right now, so-called gotaways, we have no idea who they are, what they want to do once they get in the country. Oh, they're just economic refugees. Well, they aren't, all of them. And we happen to know that in Mexico, there is Hamas training camps and Hezbollah training camps in the country of Mexico. And all they have to do is walk into the United States to get equipment and do a terrorist act here, no problem. There's nothing to really stop them. Certainly with the Godaway situation, again, they walk in, they might have to run a little bit or jog a little bit coming into our country, but they are free to come in and free to do what they want once they get in.
Rick, you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. Lou, your question was who benefits, and I would say it's the migrants who benefit. If you look at what's happened in Venezuela, which is pretty instructive for our country, the oil industry was nationalized in name in 1976, but in fact it was not. It wasn't until Chavez come in that they actually nationalized it, and socialistic policies took over. And once socialistic policies took over, that economy collapsed. And now people living in that country are starving. Babies die in hospitals because the incubators break down and they can't fix them. They're packing up and they're leaving just to get out of there. And yeah, if you see them laying on the streets of New York, that doesn't look good. But you know something, Lou? It's better than what they have.
Yeah,
and when a lot of them get to our country, they get fed, they get some medical attention, they get something. And so they're the beneficiaries, and that's why they're coming. For us, the shame of it is our country seems to be on a path to make the same socialistic mistakes that are forcing these people to leave their country. But for now, yeah, they benefit, and the burden comes up onto our country to handle this mass influx of people looking for a better life.
You know, Rick, I've spoken to this as well. And what I've said before is that there are many people in need, legitimate need of accessing this country that should have an opportunity to have something better than they have. The problem is it's been commingled with other agendas, some of which are not in the best interest of this country. And you and I both know that the vetting process is all but non-existent. They don't have databases that they maintain, they don't share information, and they change identities like we change our underwear. For those of us, I'm not directing this at you, Tom, for those of us that wear underwear and we change it every day. Because Tom and I had this conversation. I don't want to talk about the commando thing right now, Rick, but just so we're clear, you know, they literally change their identities like we change underwear every day. And that's all part of what's fueling this thing. You know, Tom brought up the gotaways. So people understand the gotaways are people we detect through technology, drones and cameras and so on and so forth, that we have absolutely no encounter with. But guys, I have to say to you, whether we encounter them or we don't encounter them, we don't know who they are. It really doesn't matter if you come across the Rio Grande on a raft or swimming. In fact, Rick, before we hang up today, myself and Tom are going to front some money. We're going to go to Mexico, give swim lessons and sell some surfboards to increase the survivability rate of crossing the Rio Grande. What's going on in this country is deplorable. But you know what I'm saying today also? Where's the morality attached to this? Where's the conscience of this country? Are we so detached as a political mechanism that we don't understand what we're doing? And I say to you, and you know, Rick, you said something really interesting that people don't realize in this country, which is why I go off on this thing about not taking this place for granted. Sleeping on cardboard outside the Roosevelt Hotel, they're being fed, by the way, even though they're out on the street. it's still probably better than where they were living.
Yeah.
And that's really quite an indictment of civilization and mankind. But I want to mention one thing about Venezuela. Apparently, Chevron was licensed in January of this year to buy oil from Venezuela. I don't understand what's going on with this country and its policies. But you know what? I live by this thing called KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And we've abandoned that concept in totality. We've become so convoluted and so attached to money that we put a price tag on the soul of this country. I think you'll agree with that, Rick. And that's something that's tragic. We don't want to belabor this immigration policy too much longer. What I'm fearful of is what we're experiencing in New York, where it's overtaxing a community, a jurisdiction, whether that jurisdiction is a city or state or multitude of states, which is coming our way if we don't put the lid on this thing. We got some dark days ahead of us. I want to take us into a discussion about the economy, because I keep listening to, and it's just an insult or offends your sense of decency, this term Bidenomics, like they think this is cute or tricky. I'm missing something here. The price of every commodity you buy in a grocery store has gone up, some of them double digits. Gasoline, it was January of 2001. I was paying $1.77 for regular gas. In states like California, it's pushing $6 a gallon. Where is this thing getting? I don't understand where they could look us in the eyes and tell us it's getting better. And I haven't even started on this whole discussion about the energy sector. Are you living in the same place I am, Rick?
Yeah, look, I can explain. And I think a lot of this is it's either misunderstood or just simply not understood, is the largest producer of crude oil in the world is the United States of America. The largest producer of liquid petroleum products is the United States of America. We produce over 3 million barrels of oil every day. But we produce something called a light sweet crude oil. Our refineries are not able to refine light sweet crude. Venezuela produces a heavy crude, sulfur-laden oil. We can refine that oil. So no matter how much oil we produce, we are always going to have to trade with a country that produces the type of oil that we're capable of refining, unless we're willing to build refineries that refine the type of oil we produce.
Rick, I got to ask you a question, if I may then.
Yes, sir.
Why was it under the Trump administration, not only were we energy independent, but we were exporting oil? So I heard what you just said. It makes perfectly good sense.
Yeah.
And it's very good information, very educational information you provided. But how do you account for the fact that we were energy independent and now we're energy dependent?
Well, I don't think we are energy dependent. I mean, the problem about Mr. Trump is you got to be a little careful listening to what he says, and you really got to check the facts. We produce more oil today than we ever did under the Trump administration. And we consume less oil than we produce. So in that sense, we are energy independent. But we're not energy independent because we don't produce the right kind of oil. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
absolutely.
Yeah, if you ignore the fact that we are going to have to import types of oil that we can refine, then we could say, yeah, we're energy independent. But if you realize that we are going to have to import those types of oil, then we have never been energy independent. Because we've always had to import them. So it kind of depends how you define it, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. That highly relevant. But I want to ask you a question then.
Sure.
Why was it so significant that Biden shut down the Keystone Pipeline the first or second day into office? And how do we account for the skyrocketing prices of gasoline?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I mean, it's significant because that pipeline transports the type of oil we need. The oil that comes in from Canada is a type of oil that we can refine. So when you cut that off, you create a problem for the country. It's not necessarily a problem we can't solve, but it's stupid, for lack of a better term.
And they were talking about, Rick, so we're clear, they were going to shut down Line 5, which I believe flows in from Canada into Michigan. So, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you see the fallacy of that, right? I mean, we, yeah, we got plenty of us. So, okay, great. If you want to shut those pipelines down, knock yourself out. But then allow us to build some refineries that can refine the type of oil that we produce.
But we haven't
Then we
done
can,
that.
you see what I'm saying? So, but
Yeah,
you
you're
can't.
absolutely right. But so now I
Yeah.
want to go back and ask you this question, sir. If we've knocked out Keystone, right?
Yes.
And we're talking about line 5, which we haven't done, thank God. How are we still energy independent? In other
Well,
words, the oil coming in through Canada through the Keystone pipeline was
Yeah.
oil we could refine. I heard what you said. We have light, sweet crude. We can't do it.
Right.
But if we eliminate the source of type of oil that we can refine, how does, you know, okay, I go back and ask you then, Rick, why are we paying $2 and $3 more a gallon, $4 more a gallon than we were in January of 2001? I watched gasoline in Northern California go to $9 a gallon for regular. I was out there. I was up in Montecito.
Sure. Excellent question. Well, I think a lot of it is driven by the global price of oil. And so you see things, if you follow the global oil markets and you see oil go up, gasoline will follow it here in the United States. Oil's a fungible commodity. It finds its way to the money. And when oil prices go up, gasoline goes up when they come. Right now, they're dropping in the United States. In fact, they're on average, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was just recently reported to $3.26 a gallon now, and they're coming down. But I'm not sure I can give you a good answer to your question, Lou. But I think the heart of it is that if you say a country is energy independent, if it produces more energy than it uses, then I would say we're energy independent. But if you say, can we just shut our borders and not bring in anything? No, we can't do that. We have to trade.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I think the leverage went in the opposite direction, Rick, when we shut down Keystone, which is why we're experiencing the impact of elevating prices per barrel of oil coming into the country. We're on the same sheet of music here. You and I both are, and I just learned something from you about this light sweet crude oil. And I've never negated the fact that we need to engage in commerce. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You know, what's interesting is that at this point, some of these nations that we're engaging in commerce with, not that this is really a departure from the norm, are adversarial to us. And we should never be in a position as we are with China, for example, where we can be leveraged, you know, and I don't know what your feeling is about that.
I agree. I mean, some of the decisions that we've made as a country writ large in terms of exporting manufacturing capacity, dependent on key things from other countries, adversarial. I'm not sure the balance of national security has been well represented in those decisions. I want to
get Tom in on this conversation. Yeah. Tom, give me some of your thoughts, buddy.
Well, I agree with Rick that, the way we're handling the policy, the way the administration shuts down the Keystone pipeline, makes me wonder, what did they realize was going to happen with that? That we cut off oil that we can process here and refine here, and then other oil that's coming in, we can't. So we have to negotiate and figure out what we're going to do. And you remember early in the Biden administration, when the administration sent representatives to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and other places saying, we need your oil. And those countries said, too bad, you're not getting it. Now, you remember the scene of Biden going to Saudi Arabia and doing a fist bump with the crown prince or whoever. And he just basically walked away from them and said, see you later. You're not getting what we need. And telling OPEC, don't increase production, leave it the way it is or lower it. So, there's a lot of, I guess, discussion over who benefited and who was hurt the most by the way the policies were implemented shortly after Biden came to power.
I want to ask this question in a more general sense, and it deals with our foreign policies in general. All three of us lived through Vietnam, and we've spoken about this Kennedy assassination and the loss of innocence of this country. and the rude awakening that there was trouble in paradise. I am suspect as to the motivation in many of our foreign policies. You know, Tom, you spoke about intelligently about this military industrial complex and who benefits from war. You know, and so we slaughtered 58,000 Americans in Vietnam, still trying to figure out the purpose of which. And Rick, I'm going to bring you in. Maybe you can provide us some insight. I know you are a veteran and you can probably speak to this. And then we kind of traverse through time, and suddenly in 1991, we've decided to insinuate ourselves into the Middle East, where there's a complete cultural disconnect. And I guess we were up in arms over the fact that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, although no other Middle Eastern countries became part of the coalition pursuing that issue with Hussein. And then, of course, then after the Trade Center, a year and a half after the buildings fell, a year and a half after, we went after Iraq for the second go round. You know, I hate to say it, but our foreign policies are deficient. Rick, you want to weigh in on this comment of mine, or this statement?
Well,
talk about Vietnam first, Rick, because I know this is more in your pipeline, generationally speaking. You're just a couple of years older than I am.
yeah. Vietnam in what sense, Lou?
Well, as far as the purpose and what whether or not that was an appropriate path of travel for our foreign policy. I mean, as it's been discussed, John Kennedy saw the handwriting on the wall because he became distrustful of the intelligence community, CIA,
Yeah.
and he wanted to withdraw any and all assets from Vietnam, I think as of December of 1963. Tom, you can correct me when you get back on if that's incorrect. But, you know, what is this propensity of this country insinuating itself into regions of this world that we have no business doing so? And it seems that every time we do it, there's a military industrial complex discussion attached to it, or other mechanisms like the, you know, IBM or whomever it might be,
Sure.
that benefit. Do you think
So
our foreign policies are good?
Yeah, I guess I'd maybe kind of bifurcate my answer to that a little bit. First of all, in the case of Vietnam, you know, I grew up. I'm actually a little older than you and Tom, but I grew up. My father had fought in the Second World War. I expect Tom's probably has too, maybe yours as well. And the thinking at that time was that you owe a duty to your country of service. You owe a duty of your country. When the country calls, you respond. And we had a draft. We didn't have a lottery. You were simply drafted. So when I graduated from high school, you either enlisted or you were going to be drafted, and you were going to be gone to Vietnam.
What year was that, Rick, if I may interrupt you?
66. I graduated in 66.
Okay,
some years later, they created the lottery and other things. But when it was my turn, it was the build up, and so there was no lottery. You were going to be drafted, which I think was actually good for the country. If we're going to go fighting wars, then it gets too easy to do if you don't have to send your children. But I guess that's another story. But I think Vietnam created the type of division and unrest, in a sense, that we are currently seeing in our country. It was an extraordinarily stressful time in the 60s. We had the war, we had President Nixon, we had assassinations, we had all of those things. And the problem with Vietnam is our parents were telling us that it was our duty to fight in a war like they fought against Germany that was trying to conquer the world. Vietnam, the objectives were fuzzy. It wasn't clear who the enemy was. It wasn't really even quite clear why we were there. This general notion of fighting communism, and if we didn't, it would come to the end. So I think that unfortunately for our country, that war did a lot of damage. The second part of my answer is this. I didn't mention this, but I had an opportunity to work on an assignment, the Committee on Appropriations for the U.S. Congress, and looking at government-funded programs, which include military programs. And I recall at the time the F-18 was being developed. And I remember a GAO guy that I was working with. We were looking at a bunch of issues around the F-18. And he just looked at me one day. He says, "You realize it doesn't really make any difference if this thing flies. We could take them off the assembly line and throw them in the ocean. The point is that a part of this aircraft is made in every state in the entire United States. It employs somebody, and that's what matters. And I mention that simply to give you a sense of the power of the military-industrial complex. The amount of money that's on the table, what it means to our economy, what it means to our elected representatives. So I've heard Tom say before, a war that can't be won feeds the beast with money, and there's no denying that. That's just a fact, and it bothers me. You'd like to think that our elected representatives would be bigger than that, but when we look at some of the conduct, it's hard to convince yourself. So,
the problem goes beyond the fact that people are making money off this. We're killing United States citizens. We're killing our children. This notion of sending our children into foreign countries where they hate you, I just don't understand that. And today we have technology. We don't even have to step off the block. We can destroy anybody on this planet at any given time. The three of us know the capabilities of this country better than most people do. But this whole notion that our children are just some type of, I guess, expendable piece of porn, whatever you want to call them, it's deplorable and it's immoral. And I understand what drives the country. I said it earlier, we've monetized the country. We put a price tag on the country, even at the expense of the lives of our children. My question today to people, how do you send your children into the military knowing the agenda of this country? What really drives us? It's to feed the industrial complex, military industrial complex, so your son can come home or your daughter come home in a body bag or emotionally or physically in pieces. This is what we've become. Is that really the best that we're offering the American public today? Tom,
Yeah,
I
the
want
way
you to
we
kinda
bring this
jump in on
about,
this thing,
Lou,
Tom.
we've
Go
talked
ahead,
about
Tom.
this many times
Yep.
on this podcast, is you lie to the people. You tell them, well, we're sorry, your children have to go to Vietnam or wherever it might be to fight this battle because the country needs it and it's in the best interest to save our United States. And you remember back in the 60s, the theory, the so-called domino theory. If we don't stop communism in South Vietnam, it's going to spread to other areas of Southeast Asia, then to the Philippines, then to Hawaii, and we'll be fighting these people on the west coast of California. They'll be invading our beaches, so we have to stop them in Vietnam. And we've heard variations of that theory lately regarding the Ukraine. We have some Democrat or some Republican candidates during the debate saying, if we don't stop Putin in the Ukraine, if we don't put an end to this, we're going to be fighting him in Eastern Europe and in the United States and around the world. So that we go back to the theory that this evil that we're confronting is going to spread if we don't confront it and if we don't send our children to bring a halt to it.
Really what we're talking about is this word called credibility, another word called morality. I mean, there's a lot of things that drive this conversation today. I am gravely concerned about the path, the course that this country's on. I think the interesting thing about America is it's the most resilient country in the history of civilization, and we could turn this around with the right type of leadership, with the right voice. What we have to explore now, unfortunately, on a day-to-day basis, is everyone's agenda. And I hate to say it, but we've become suspect of everyone. I opened up, this show today talking about the big lie. All we are is lied to about the border issue, about the problems in your major cities, about your economy, about this transition to electricity, which is not quite as simple as everybody would think it is, about the elimination of fossil fuel. It's become like a gigantic lie. And, I don't understand why, because I'm not someone that's ever embraced anything other than the truth. The truth is comfortable and simple to live with. The rest of this nonsense you've got to keep track of. But you know what it is? They just keep lying to us. And that's a big part of the problem. And I think like going forward, this next election, I don't know who the candidates are going to be. And I don't want to get political. I'm not telling anybody who to vote for. I don't think that's appropriate. I think you have to look at the condition of the country and ask yourself if you wanted to continue to proceed in the direction that it is. I personally don't think Donald Trump is the answer, because I think as much good as he may do for the country in certain regards, he's going to finish tearing and dividing this country into two, at least into two. I certainly don't like this administration we have, just looking at the border policies, the indiscriminate manner in which the criminal element navigate our major cities. Guys, for anyone that has time, please look up at the crime statistics in Washington, D.C., the capital of our country. Look up the crime statistics in Philadelphia. Half the population of the city of Chicago, twice as many homicides. They're well over 1,000 homicides. The population of Philadelphia is 1.5 million people. Guys, we've got problems here, but the good news is they're fixable. The question is, who do we put into office that can galvanize the country? We're going to close the show, and I just want to say something, and it goes back to John Kennedy, who was the last president, along with Ronald Reagan. But Kennedy had a way about him, and I'm going to come to Rick, because Rick is a few years older than we are, Tom. Although I know you're much older than I am, Tom. I hate to keep bringing that up. I apologize, but by one day, it's a lot, Tom. It's a lot. John Kennedy's administration was interesting, because if you follow this man, when he got into the presidency, he grew into that job. It wasn't that he was perfect in his performance, but it looks like he had a conscience about how he led the country, something that's absent today. And I tell everyone, regardless of their political affiliation, look at this administration, listen to his speeches, follow how enamored not only this country was, but this world was with this man. There's something to be said about that. And I'm not going back to this discussion about overpopulation and reminding both of you that the population was half of what it was. I'm not going to rub it in, guys, but I'm going to give you the final word today, Rick. And I want to make sure you're back on this show with us, because you contributed a lot of very good information. And I was concerned, ladies and gentlemen, I was going to be ganged up on by these two former FBI guys, but they were pretty good. I have to be candid with you. I know Tom had something up his sleeve, but that's something different. I know he's upset about the underwear and commando comment. I'm not getting off that, Tom. You're not getting off the hook. But Rick, tell us what you're thinking on this. This Kennedy administration.
Oh, I thought you meant Tom's underwear. Well,
I sensitive about that, Rick. I want you to know.
I very distinctly remember the election of President Kennedy. In fact, my father worked for his reelection. I actually have an actual invitation to his inaugural framed here in the house, that at that time, President Kennedy sent everyone who worked for his campaign an invitation, knowing they're not all going to come, but it was an honorary thing. He was a transitional president. He represented, I would say, us, a younger baby boom generation. He was young, he was vibrant, he was charismatic. He just was a man you could admire. He overcame a lot of things, like the fear the country had about electing a Catholic as priest. People probably laugh at that now. At the time, there was worry that the Pope would run the country. So he was great as a president. Though I think it's very easy to forget that when the president was assassinated, there was a pretty good chance he might not be reelected. I mean, there were some things that had happened in his administration, the Bay of Pigs. There were a number of things going on that I don't know if he would have been reelected or not. I think at the time, my memory is the polls were fairly close. But the thing about John Kennedy is he was more than a president. He was just a transitional person. And to see him die in the way he did was like ripping the heart out of a generation of people. It had everyone who was alive the day the president was shot can tell you precisely where they were that day. It was, people cried in the street. It was just such an emotional thing. And I guess in a way it was a loss of innocence. Our president, our hope for the future, had been gunned down. I mean, it's still hard. It almost brings tears to your eyes today, the loss to the country. I believe it changed things. And I think that we and everybody watching, I mean, the one thing I'd say to you is in some ways, we operate under the assumption that we'll be okay, that somehow we're America. We can survive anything. We can elect any idiot we want and do anything we want, but we'll be okay because we're the United States. That's not true. Bad things can happen to this country. Our hope for the future got shot and killed. Keep in mind, we're not invulnerable. We got to pay attention. That's as much as I can say.
Rick, you made some very good points about the president, and you did mention the Bay of Pigs.
Yeah.
And something that I think came out of this administration, that assassination, is that we had a country that was basically being run by the intelligence community, and that they'd gotten a little rogue, in my opinion, just my opinion. The Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, this thing in Vietnam. I think by the time he'd gone through the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, he saw the handwriting on the wall with Vietnam, because the very same people that were advising him in those two episodes were trying to waltz him into Vietnam, and he knew there was a problem there. I went to 16 years of Catholic school, Rick. I don't know if you're aware of that. And I had Irish Catholic nuns, Sister Sean Maureen, Sister Martin Maureen. I had every Maureen on the block, and we were spoon-fed this man, and understandably so, why we were. But independent of that, if you listen to his speeches today, this man sought peace. That's really what his whole mantra was. That's what was his agenda, was finding peace in this world and a future for people. They say he was killed because of organized crime, and Tom will talk to you intelligently about Alan Dulles and his brother and other issues that may have motivated our intelligence community. I think he just got too damn powerful, to be very candid with you. He was someone who was financially independent. Let me say one other thing that he started to brush up against was this whole civil rights movement, which I'm sure did not fall in favor of many people in this country, because back then we were a racist nation. We're not today. I don't believe we are today, and we're not going to go down that road. We don't have time. I don't believe we are today. Back then, I do believe we were far more racist than we ever were today. I just think we were cheated, and I just implore these elected officials, if you're really concerned and you want to hang your hat on someone that loved this country, that galvanized this country, take a good look at John Kennedy. Guys, the next episode, we're probably going to continue this conversation about John Kennedy. It cannot be overstated, the significance of his administration or his introduction into our lives, because he represented a lot of things that made this country great. And let me be clear, we've had problems since the inception of the country. That's not the issue. A lot of it has to do with how you manage them. Do you learn from them, and do you go forward? And that's really what I liked about John Kennedy. There was a plan about going forward. Rick, we will be in contact with you regarding forward moving episodes on this podcast. If you're inclined to participate, we'd love to have you. Tom, your contributions are, you can't quantify how important they are because of how factually based and the historical value and your understanding of this culture, how we've evolved, and where we are today, which is critically important. Because, guys, this is not about myself or Rick or Tom. It's about our children. We're giving the young people a shot in the keister they're not going to recover from, guys. We are not preparing them. I don't know if we can prepare them for the future of this country at the rate we're going. We're in such a divide. We're so polarized, and it doesn't have to be this way. But I'm going to just say one thing. We've got people from everywhere on the planet here, and I don't see people inclined to assimilate and to abandon parts of their culture or their background to become part of this great nation. We're rubbed in our face every day where they came from. I'm going to say this very simply and not in a narrow-minded way. If you're so enamored with other parts of the world or places you came from, go back there. But I just go back and say, we're overpopulated. We're going to wrap it for today. I got the last word on that one. And we're going to have Rick back, and we're going to have Tom back, and we're going to see you next week. We're going to talk more about this Kennedy assassination. We're going to talk more about this Ukraine episode. We're going to talk more about this incident that took place in Israel, because I didn't have a chance to probe Rick about this intelligence failure. So, Rick, be prepared when we bring you back. There's a big discussion take place there, and I know Tom is going to be part of that as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Operation Truth Official at gmail.com is the vehicle on how you contact us. become part of this conversation, help us push this thing along. We're not doing this because we have free time. We're doing this because we're trying to make this place better than we found it. See you next time, guys.